Here's what I'm going to do. I want you to, this will be a little bit awkward. I want you to look around you. I want you to look to your left and to your right, and maybe even do a little quick, peek behind you, and just take a look at who's around you, because these are your people. Right? These are your people. People around you. These are your people. They are your responsibility. Your duty even is to the people to your left and to your right. Whenever we do child dedications, or like last week when we baptized some people, as a part of that liturgy, one of the things that we'll do is we always put in there a question for the congregation. Will you be a part of this child's growth? Will you be a part of this person being baptized, their discipleship, their maturation, their growth? Will you take the responsibility and commit yourself to them, because we can't do this thing alone. That we can't do this thing alone, that the people to your left and the people to your right, they are your people, they are your responsibility, because God designed this thing to work in community, and we can't do this by ourselves. And you might be looking around, and you might have looked around, you might have said, these aren't my people actually, Pastor. These are not my people. They're too young, or they're too old, or this is not my color or my culture, or this isn't my political leaning. I can tell by what he's wearing, which way he leans, this isn't my vibe, right? And you might say, no, actually, this isn't my people, or I haven't maybe felt home here in a couple of weeks, or I'm new here. And you might have all of these kind of questions about whether or not we are each other's people. And yet, here's one true fact that we can't get past. The God of the universe, who is over all things and does all things, who is over all 700 churches and all of these nations that are part of the Acts 29 network, all of that, this God of the universe has orchestrated 10,000 things to bring you to these people and to this moment right now. And he doesn't make mistakes, and he says we can't do this alone, and he gave us one another. He gave us one another. Whether we are each other's people or not, God said, y'all are each other's people. This is how I'm doing this thing. And he doesn't make mistakes. And the truth is, you weren't God's people either, right? There was a time where you weren't God's people, where you had rejected God, where you had rebelled against God, where you had rejected his love, and yet in his grace, through the death and resurrection of Jesus, he has made you his people. And so we are one another's people. He's invited us into this family, and the people around you are his family. And so I'll tell you again, look around. Look at the people to your left and your right. Think about the glory of these people around you. And you know some of them, and you know some that isn't all that glory-like in them. But think about the glory of these people around you, his bride. Romans 8:29 says that they have been predestined to look like Jesus. That before the foundations of the earth, before God painted one sunset or raised one mountain, he said the person to your left and to your right is going to look like Jesus. He's going to look like Jesus. She's going to look like my son, and all that he is and all of his glory. That 1 Peter 1 says their faith is going to result in praise, glory, and honor. Their praise, their glory, their honor. The people to your left and to your right are royalty, is what the Bible teaches. That you are royalty, that you are destined for glory, and you get to be a part of one another becoming what you will become. And that's unbelievable when you think about it, right? What heaven will be like when we see one another. And our little corner of heaven is the Paradox Church, and we get to celebrate all that God has done in our 40 years together maybe, and we get to see one another and be like, man, I was in a group with her, and I remember she prayed for me, and he was on that serve team, and we get to see one another in that moment in heaven. Think about what we will look like in glory. Right, the person to your left or your right, they're going to be, like, think about how strong they're going to be then, and how bold and how humble and how holy and how filled with joy. Like right now, we're not that. Right now, there's an aspect of us, there's parts of us that are insecure, we're anxious, we're pretty selfish most of the time, and there's aspects of us that are still being sanctified. God's at work in each of our hearts, but what we will become is going to be unbelievable, and we get to be a part of helping one another become what we are becoming. And so this is a gift to us that we get to be one another's people. Now, some of you are like, all right, maybe they're not my people. All right, maybe they are. But then another kind of thing that comes up in your heart when I talk about this is some of you walk in here and think, but I have nothing to offer these people. My life is a mess. I can't even take care of myself, let alone be responsible for other people. Jesus is going to address that too in our text today. But he's going to instruct us, encourage us in some things in regards to this community of faith. Because so much of the past few weeks and months, if you've been around, through our conversation in Luke, has been mainly about you and Jesus, right? You and God. And your need of God, or maybe how money hinders you from God, or all these different things. It's all been vertical about you and God. But today, Jesus kind of switches it up a little bit. Now he wants to talk about each other, how we relate to one another, how we help one another or hurt one another become what we are becoming. That's what he wants to talk about this morning. And so look at verse 1 again, chapter 17, verse 1, and we'll see what he says to us as a people, and then we're going to chat at the end. There's some things I want to talk through about us as a church. So verse 1 again, and he, Jesus, said to his disciples, so now he's talking to his disciples. The last few weeks he's been talking to who? The Pharisees, right? The religious leaders, the guys that pushed back on him, and he's talking to them, and now he turns to his disciples after that conversation because he wants to instruct them on some things too, and he says, temptations to sin are sure to come. Ain't that the truth? Right? He's like, man, the world and its ways and the enemy who wants to oppose you and your own hearts that deceive you without even trying, temptations to sin are sure to come. They are certain to come, but woe to the one through whom they come. It would be better for him if a millstone, this is hardcore right here, if a millstone were hung around his neck and he were cast into the sea, than that he should cause one of these little ones to sin. Here's what he's saying. He's saying this thing is already hard for us. Right, this Christian thing, this spiritual journey, living life in obedience to God and glory to God, it's already hard. We're already tempted to sin. We're already tempted to do this thing wrong. So don't make it harder for one another. Right? The enemy hates us. The way the world works is contrary to how God would have us work and live. And our own hearts, they're in opposition. They lean towards, they drift towards not the things of God, but away from the things of God. And so he's saying there's another team already out there that wants to beat us. Make sure we're playing on the right team. Right? He's talking about people in the church who wear reversible jerseys. Remember reversible jerseys? And you've got pink and purple, right? Or orange and yellow, whatever it is. And you can easily switch teams. He's talking about people in the church that look like they're on your team, but then they switch their jersey and now they're working actually against you. They're working on the side of the enemy. They're doing things that would lead you into stumbling, lead you into temptation, lead you away from Jesus. That's what he's talking about here. Jesus is talking about people in the church with reversible jerseys. All right? They look like they're a part of your team, but they're really not. And when he talks about the little ones, right, when he says that should cause one of these little ones to sin, he's not talking about children there. He's talking about disciples. He's talking about just your normal, everyday, he's talking about us, right? Jesus-loving plumbers, Jesus-loving engineers, Jesus-loving students. We are the little ones, and he's saying there's things that we can do to each other that make each other stumble, that make this thing harder than it already is. Like there's in the Bible, in the New Testament, there's all these beautiful one another's. Have you seen those? Where we're instructed to live in such a way with one another, love one another, forgive one another, bear up one another's burdens. Like there's these beautiful one another's for how we should live as the family of God. But then there's other things that we do, other one another's that we do that aren't in the Bible and that lead people to stumble. As one author put it, nowhere in the Bible do you see it say, hey, sanctify one another. Doesn't say that. Humble one another. Doesn't say that. Scrutinize one another, pressure one another, embarrass one another, corner one another, interrupt one another, defeat one another, sacrifice one another, shame one another, marginalize one another, exclude one another, run one another's lives, confess one another's sins. We don't see that in the Bible. And yet so often that's the church culture and church community that many of us have experienced, hopefully, at other churches and not here. And so the principle here is obvious and the implications are endless. I mean, you can apply this to your life in 100 different ways, but Jesus is talking about pastors who are heavy-handed and they're impatient with their people, the same people that they're meant to shepherd slowly and gently. He's talking about them. He's saying, it would be rather you get thrown into the ocean than if you were to lead one of your people astray. He's talking about leaders in the church who condemn the young disciple with weak faith, thinking that everybody should understand what they already know and everyone should believe what they already believe. He's talking about people leaders in the church that shame the person who has doubts as if you've never had doubts. He's talking about leaders who are harsh with the people who maybe need some correcting in their theology and they're just harsh about it. He's talking about professors who teach against a biblical theology and instead lead their people, lead their students into more of a worldly philosophy or way of life. He's talking about disciples who gossip about other disciples to other disciples, placing stumbling blocks in front of other disciples so that they might gossip. He's talking about disciples who shame other disciples because they don't do things the way that they should do them and the way that they do things, and they are shamed. Basically, Jesus is saying this: if you are not humble with one another, and you don't have a posture of love to serve one another and to serve other believers, it would be better if you were tossed into the sea mafia style than if you ever got a chance to do that. If you ever got a chance to roll up to one of our city groups, right, and shame somebody there, hurt somebody there, lead somebody into stumbling, it would be better if we threw you into the sea. Now that's like a ministry we don't have, you know? That's a ministry we don't have at the church. It's like, who's got the chain, who we don't have that kind of ministry, and yet Jesus is painting a very strong picture. He's saying this is a really big deal. Which is why he says in verse 3, he says, pay attention to yourselves. Pay attention to yourselves. This is a big deal. Watch out. Be sober and alert, he says in other places. He'll say, Paul will tell a pastor in 1 Timothy, watch your life and your doctrine closely. Like, don't just have good theology, but make sure your life, it matches what your theology teaches, because it's your life that will lead people into stumbling. 1 Peter 5, it says that we have to be watchful because there's an enemy who is like a lion looking to devour us. And so pay attention to yourselves. Jesus is saying we can't be so distracted and so busy and so naive that we don't recognize where we are and what we've been doing and how that might, affect the other people and influence the other people around us. If we never take stock in our own souls, if we never pay attention to ourselves, and we never consider our surroundings and maybe where we've drifted to, right? We don't drift towards godliness. Have you noticed that? Like I just, my own heart confession just was praying that this morning. Like I don't drift towards the things of God. We don't drift towards forgiveness and reconciling with people and grace and Bible reading and prayer. Like we don't drift towards those things. If we aren't careful, we are drifting, and we don't drift towards God and God's people and God's church, but away. We drift into bitterness, and we drift into unforgiveness, and we drift into contemptuousness, and we drift away from God and away from God's people. We never accidentally wake up in the morning and just read our Bible. It doesn't work that way. And so pay attention to yourselves. What's easy is bitterness. What's easy is spiritual laziness, and so we have to be careful. And so even now, take stock in your relational soul, in your spiritual soul. Are there people in the church that you're unreconciled with? Are there people in the church? Are there people in the faith? Are there people in your group? Are there people in this church that, I don't know, you have some bitterness towards, you have some contempt towards, you have some unforgiveness towards? Maybe they've hurt you and you haven't really kind of dealt with it and talked to them about it, or reconciled with them in that, or maybe love hasn't covered a multitude of sins for you, right? And you're just kind of holding on to it. Take stock in your relational soul. Where are you at? Or maybe you've been drifting. And maybe in that drift, you have influenced the people that you have influence over away from Jesus and his church. Right? You're a husband, or you're a mom, or you're a leader, or you're a friend. Jesus is saying what you do and where you are affects other people, and so pay attention. Pay attention. Me and a couple of elders met with a gal last week, and she moved out of town, but so she's not a part of the church anymore. But she wanted to make sure she left clean, right? She wanted to make sure that there was some things worked out. And man, she had just such a sweet, tender heart, just such a soft spirit. It was just so refreshing and sweet. But it was unbelievably mature because she just wanted to make sure that she tidied up some relationships in the church so that she could leave free. She could leave honoring Christ in his church. And I got an email from my brother this past week, and he was just concerned about a couple of things, and it was so mature of him because he recognizes that the church is united, and how the church is going to influence and affect him and his home, and how he is going to influence and affect the church at large as well, because we're united in this thing, and how he is affects the church, and how the church is affects him. And that's just mature. That's just a reality, because what you are becoming individually and what we are becoming as a people is inextricably linked, right? Where how you are is going to be how we are, and how we are is going to be how you are. That's just how this thing works in a church, right? Where you go, we go, and where we go, you go. Ephesians 4 says, when every part of the body is working properly, it makes the church grow, building itself up in love. And so pay attention to yourselves. Pay attention to yourselves. And then the second part of verse 3, he gives us some instruction. He says, if your brother sins, rebuke him. And if he repents, forgive him. And if he sins against you 7 times in the day, that's a rough day. At some point, I'm like, hey, I think we need a break. You know? It's like, I think, hey man, let's just see each other tomorrow, you know? But if he sins against you 7 times in the day and turns to you 7 times saying, I repent, you must forgive him. So here's, I love how the word works, and I love how preaching works. Man, every time I preach, I feel like I'm living the sermon first. Here's lately how I've been thinking about these kind of things, because I've just had a lot of opportunities to sit down with people and work through issues and talk through things, and you know, as a dad to kids, as a husband to a wife, as a pastor to a people, as a boss to a staff, all sorts of different conversations and circumstances where I step in and have some of these conversations. If your brother sins, rebuke him. If he repents, forgive him. Here's what I'm learning, or here's what I'm trying to do. I want to show people how God responds to them when they mess up. I want, like, as a dad, my goal as a dad is to show my kids how God responds to them when they sin. And man, if I get that wrong, then I think I've gotten parenting wrong. And I struggle with that, because it's like, they got to grow up to be, they're going to be the pastor kid, they're crazy. What's the kid city leader going to write today? And about how they behaved, and you worry about all those things. But in the end, my win as a daddy is that they would see in me what their heavenly dad does when they mess up. That's my goal. That's my goal as a pastor, as a husband, as a friend. I want to show people how God responds to them. I want to be a picture, a mirror image of what God does when people sin. Like, this verse keeps coming up in my heart over the last couple of weeks. This is the one that we can show you, Ephesians 4. Paul says, let all bitterness and wrath and anger and clamor and slander be put away from you. Oh, by the way, along with all malice. By the way, you can't know that's happening in your heart, most likely, unless you take stock in your relational soul, or unless you pay attention. I don't know, at least me. Maybe you guys are more emotionally intelligent than I am, but I don't know those things are happening that I could put them away unless I take a moment and breathe before the Lord and just say, what's going on in my heart? But put them away, he says. Let them put them away from you. Verse 32, be kind to one another, Tender-hearted, that's the word. Tender-hearted, forgiving one another as God in Christ forgave you. Isn't that a great word, tender-hearted? There's just something about that word that resonates with my heart, right? Tender-hearted, that's the heart of God towards the people sitting to your left and to your right. The heart of God is tender towards the people in your group, the people in your community, the people around you that have hurt you or have sinned against you. His heart is tender towards them in their sin. His heart is soft to your kids in their sin. His heart is soft towards your wife when you don't think she gets it. His heart is soft towards the people around you, towards your pastor, towards your leader who is messed up. His heart is soft towards them. His heart is soft. And so, because his heart is tender, be tender-hearted, forgiving one another as God forgave you. The sad thing about this is we tend to not do either one of these things that Jesus just said to do, right? We don't confront our brother in his sin, and we also don't forgive him when he does sin. The alternative, what we typically do is just kind of write each other off, right? We just bounce. We bounce from the relationship, we distance ourselves from each other, we leave the group, we leave the relationship, we leave the church, we leave the marriage, we just kind of bounce. We don't do either one of the things that we are supposed to do, that God calls us to do as an image of what God does to us in our sin, right? We just write one another off. That's not at all how Jesus is to us in our sin. God confronts us in our sin. And if we were to love one another, we would gently confront one another in their sin. We're like, yo, this is not okay where you're going, and I see your trajectory, and there's a pattern in your life, and brother, do you see this? Sister, do you see this? I don't think this is good for your soul, and I don't think this is good for the glory of God. Will you repent? Will you turn from this? Will you not do this? Will you not go in that direction? That's actually not a hard conversation. And there's some things like even sociologically and technologically that are causes for why this is so hard now for especially our generation to confront. Like so much of what we do is over text, and so much is passive and distant, and we have a hard time doing real life confrontation anymore and having hard conversations. But regardless of what culture or generation we're a part of, the scriptures call us to it because it's loving. Because it's how God is for us. And we're to mirror the way in which God would respond to us. Right? He confronts us in our sin, and those kind of conversations should be happening literally every day in the life of this church, where we humbly and gently, prayerfully rebuke one another, not out of harsh judgment, like you don't fall, but out of place of tender-hearted love for your brother. Man, like what else would make Christians unique in how we relate to one another? Isn't this part of what makes us distinct, that we forgive? That we would call one another to Jesus? Like, isn't that part of what makes us a loving people? Jesus said, well, they're going to know you're my disciples by by how you love one another. And so we are to love one another in this way. And then, of course, God, he confronts us in our sin, but he also forgives us, right? Over and over and over. Think about like that one sin that you kind of keep sinning. Right, just over and over. And you're always asking God for forgiveness in it, and you're trying to work on it, and you're like frustrated with it. Does he forgive you 7 times in a day? Yes. Yes. Like he forgives you over and over and over. Jesus' work on the cross 2,000 years ago meant that all of your sins were future sins that he forgave. And so your sin tomorrow, when you sin again in that same way next week, there's forgiveness for you in that. There's grace for you in that. And so when we do the same thing, we don't grow weary in forgiving our brother, and we extend the same grace 7 times over to our sister. And that's the stuff of heaven, man. Right? That's a kingdom people. That's legit. That's something, we're a part of something bigger. We're part of something different when we do that, as we do what God has done for us. And so that means like we don't create boundaries from one another. We don't block one another. We don't distance ourselves from one another. That's not how we respond in the church relationally. That might be how the world might respond or culture might respond, but that's not how we do this thing. Right? What we do is we take the bread and the wine and we eat it together because it represents the same grace that all of us need. The same grace The same mercy towards our sin is extended and given to your brother and to your sister. And so, man, I want to be an outline of Christ to people. I want them to be able to trace the edges of grace and color in the reality of his love so that they can see how God responds to people when they mess up. How do you respond to people when they mess up? How do you respond to them in their sin? Take stock of your relational soul and, man, where maybe have you written people off instead of in love, confronted them and loved them? Okay, let's keep going. A couple more things, and then I want to chat as a church, kind of a little quick family meeting here at the end. In verse 5, Jesus' crew feels some of the weight of this. Maybe you feel some of the weight of this. Right? Not leading people astray, grabbing a hold of them when they do, forgiving them when they hurt you, paying attention to yourself, right? They feel the weight of this. And so in verse 5, they say, increase our faith. They're saying, I don't know if I can do this, Jesus. I don't know, my heart drifts away from these kind of things, Jesus, and that seems hard, Jesus, and people hurt me, and my heart can be so easily hardened, and people are tough, and they're just recognizing their humanity in this moment, as we probably are. Have you ever noticed how easily bruised we are, how fragile we are? I was just thinking about this, how one word of encouragement can make my day, and how one word of discouragement can ruin my day. And that tells me a lot about, encouraging words and how important they are, but it also tells a lot about me and how fragile I am. How fragile I am. That one word, I'm a 42-year-old grown man. And I've been a leader of an organization the last 11 years, and I've got a dog and 3 kids. I should be more grown up than this, and yet how fragile I am. That one word can tear me down, and one word can build me up. And so they're saying, Lord, this is hard. Relationships are hard, and church is hard, and people are hard, and my heart is hard. We need you to increase our faith if we're going to obey this thing, if we're going to do this thing. And so Jesus is saying, no, you can do this, right? Even if you have a little bit of faith, even if you have a little bit of trust in me, a little bit of hope in me, a little bit of belief in me, that's all that you need. What he's saying is you have the Holy Spirit, and I've given you a new heart, and I'm at work in you, right? I'm doing this thing, and you are becoming what you will become. What I predestined you to be, you will be in glory. You're gonna look like me. And so it just takes a little bit of Jesus, a little bit of trust, a little bit of faith, and you can uproot this tree and throw it into the sea. And what he's doing there is he's painting a picture. He's saying, he's saying, with faith in me, just a little bit of me, whatever's rooted in you, right? Whatever is rooted deep in you that makes this thing hard, that can be uprooted so that you can do this, right? So, my defensiveness, deep within me, there's just this defensiveness that is utterly amazed that anyone could have anything wrong with me. Okay? You just can't, it's hard to imagine, why I don't understand. Why you would think anything bad about me. And so immediately within me, there's something deep in me that's just defensive. Or I have this sense of justice, which is a really good thing. There's a godly aspect to me about that. But then it can cause me to distance myself from people and judge them and be really mad because it's a righteous anger, but not a righteous response to that anger, if that makes sense. It's just deep in my being, deep in my heart. There's an anger that's rooted in my heart. There's this thing in me, I don't know what it is yet, but I just feel betrayed really easily, quickly. No abandonment issues, mom and dad were awesome, everybody's good. There's just something in me that just can feel betrayed where I don't need to feel betrayed. All of that self-protection and self-focus and selfishness that keeps us from loving one another, that keeps us from being an image, a picture of God's response to people when they make a mess, that can be uprooted, he said. That can be uprooted. What he's saying is this. He's saying, I'm not trying to tell you to just figure it out and do it. He's saying, you already trust in me. This is my work in you. This is what I'm doing in you right now. Will you just obey in faith that I'm actually working these things out in you? If you would stop worrying about yourselves and stop protecting yourselves, just recognize, trust, like let me be your vindicator. Let me be your defender. Let me be the judge. Let me do this thing, and you just do what I've asked you to do and respond in this kind of way to one another. Just obey me in faith, and you're going to see what I'm doing. In fact, that's going to be part of you becoming what you're going to become, is by how you respond to one another. And as I do that, in that moment, I can be a trace outline of the grace of God. I can be a trace outline of God's grace towards people in their sin as I show them grace when they've sinned against me. Jesus is saying, I'm at work in my beautiful bride to make her beautiful. And so just trust me. Even a little bit of faith, and you can do this. And then he tells this quick parable, and the whole point of the parable is in the last line in verse 10. He says, we are just servants. We have done our duty. Okay, and so here's what he's saying. Like, some of you are like, yeah, get him, Pastor. I do this. He's saying you can't kind of have that posture of pride that you're awesome in the church when everybody else isn't. He's saying this is the stuff that, like, this is what you just do. This is what it means to be a Christian. To look like Christ, So this stuff isn't for the pastors to do or the religious elite or varsity Christians. Like, this is just what it means to be a Christian, to do this kind of thing. But here the word duty is the word that I kind of highlight. I love that word, right? Like duty is a lost art in our radical individualistic world with our freakish autonomy and everything is about us and our rights, Just this sense of duty. I just love that. I love that. Texas has a lot of, people that have served in the armed forces and obviously people that are, there's a base here and serving here and stuff like that. Anytime I see somebody in that uniform, there's a sense of reverence for me, because there's I recognize in that moment that there's a sense of duty that this person has and that this person is taking to serve that I don't know that I have. I don't know that I sense or see, and it's kind of hard to find in our culture anymore. Right? Where there used to be a sense of duty in a community where you lived your life not just for yourself, but for the family or for the tribe or for the community. You lived your life not just for yourselves, but for the people around you. And I think that's what Jesus is getting. This is our duty, our duty to one another, our responsibility to one another, to help one another become what Jesus is making us become and to not hurt us. Right? At the least, don't hurt one another in becoming what they become. In a sense of duty, it actually means I'm a part of something bigger than me, and I get to serve like Jesus served, and I get to be a part of something that keeps me from becoming the things that I don't want to become. Having a sense of duty means I'm not going to be prideful. I'm not going to be arrogant. I'm not going to be entitled. Nobody wants to be that. You can be an atheist and agnostic in this place right now, not even believing the words that I'm saying, but you do believe that. You don't want to be that. Nobody wants to be entitled. But living with a sense of duty for a greater cause and a greater people, that's something that just kind of keeps us humble and helps us become what we want to become. So I love that word. So let's chat. Here's what I was really excited about this morning and just having this conversation. As much as we've talked about us and the Lord and how important that is and our worship and our need and our just all the things between you and God it's so vital. But having this conversation about each other is so important too, because in 8 months, Lord willing, we're going to walk into our new place, right? We're going to move out of this apartment on the west side of town and move into our own home in downtown Fort Worth. And with that, for me, has been this sense of duty, this rising responsibility that I feel for us as we move into this new place around a number of things, our diversity, our work in the city, the evangelistic temperature of us as a people. There's things that I'm man, this stuff needs to grow, and I don't want to walk into this new place without that rising. But also us as a culture, the culture of our church is what I keep thinking about and playing out and praying through, right? People make a culture. We can say all we want on our website, we can say all we want on our social media, that we treasure Jesus and we honor one another and we shepherd first and we fight for kingdom moments and we dream big. We fear nothing and no man for the good of people and the glory of God. We can say that all we want, but it's the people that make the culture. And there's a way in which I want to make sure we walk into that place in 8 months where we have a gospel culture, right? This kind of culture, this air that I want us to breathe that we've been fighting for 11 years. We've been cultivating for 11 years. And then again, we don't drift towards a gospel culture. We don't drift towards those things. They have to be intentional. We have to fight for them. A culture is different than just beliefs or strategies. The famous quote, I don't know who it was, some leadership guy back in the day, that culture eats strategy for breakfast. It's the same, that's true for the church as well, right? That our culture will eat our theology for breakfast. Or we could have the best theology in the city, and I think we do. I'm just saying, I like it. Most of you are here because you like what we teach, you like what we believe, you like our stance, you like our preaching through the Bible, you agree with, that's why you're here, right? There's literally hundreds of churches in the city you could go to get the kind of, 5 steps to a better relationship and marriage series, or the really, high energy, uplifting messages, and that's just not really us. That's just not me. That's just not us. We're uplifting in a weird way. In more of a paradox way, you like our doctrine, right? You like our theology, but without a gospel culture to go with our gospel doctrine, that's just not going to cut it for us. That's just not going to cut it for us anymore. We can't move into this place and have the greater responsibility and influence that it probably brings, and we just got to fight for that kind of culture. So Ray Ortlund, one of my mentors, he puts it this way. A gospel doctrine minus a gospel culture makes you a church of hypocrites, right? Here's what we believe, but we don't live it out, okay? But then gospel culture minus gospel doctrine equals a really weak church, right? Well, we're really loving, but we don't really believe anything. We're really nice, but we don't really know why we're nice. There's no theological basis for our niceness. We're just nice. What we want is a gospel doctrine plus a gospel culture. That makes a church strong. That makes a church powerful. That's the kind of work that we're wanting to do. Well, what is a gospel culture? Well, it's where our doctrine, right, what we believe, what we believe about the Bible, what we believe about Jesus, it's where Jesus' teaching shapes us into an outline of his grace. That's a gospel culture. Where people come into our midst and they breathe an air of grace among our people, right? Where it forms us, where Jesus' teachings form us, and we do what Jesus is calling us to do in our text today. That's a gospel culture. A gospel culture recognizes that we could all find ourselves in a tough place, that we all need grace, that there could be a time when all of us fall. There's a time when all of us are going to make a mess of our lives, and we all need Jesus equally, and there's nobody that walked through the doors this morning, Christian or not Christian, that doesn't need the same grace or any more of Jesus than you would. There's nobody here that needs more Jesus than you do. We recognize that, and so we become a safe place for people then. Right, when we recognize that we all walked in needing to eat the same bread and drink the same wine and experience the same grace, when we're that kind of people and that kind of culture, then we will actually honor one another. Then we will actually shepherd one another. We'll do the things that are on our website, but people make the culture. People make the culture. I shared this idea with you years ago, so for some of you might have seen this, but most of us experience this kind of culture in the church. Right? Our church culture experience was law plus shame plus now. Right? It was law. Do this. Here's what you need to do. Here's 5 things that you need to do to be a part of this church, to be a Christian, and here's what you need to do. You need to do this. Shame, or else we're going to judge you, or else we're going to cancel you, or else. And now you can struggle There's no time to grow. You need to do this now because this is what is right and this is what it looks like to be a part of this people and a part of this church. You need to do this right now or else. Right? That was our culture. Right? That was the culture some of you grew up with. That is not a church. That's a cult. Right? That's a Nazi regime. That's a dictatorship. That is not the church of Jesus. That is not our church at all. That is not the way that a church should be. Right? What a biblical church should be is this. Right? Gospel plus safety plus time. That's the culture of a gospel church. Right? Gospel. We're going to focus on what Jesus did. We're going to focus on what Jesus did. We're going to take one look at our sin and 10 looks at Jesus. Safety. And so because we're focusing on Jesus and not you, we have grace for you. We have grace for one another. This thing is about Jesus and what he has purchased and what he has done. And so here's grace if you mess up. In fact, we're going to give you time, right? We're going to wait. We're going to be really patient. We're going to long suffer. I mean, we talk about this as elders. We talk about this to our leaders. Like, man, what if this person is in this sin? What if this person believes this? What if this person is headed this way? Man, we're going to confront them in that. We're going to talk to them in that with gentleness. But we will walk with you for years, in hope that you will turn from your ways or repent of this errant theology, or you will, whatever, we will walk with you for years. For years. Because we know how long it takes for us to grow. We know how long it takes for God to do a work in our heart and how slow that is. The kingdom of God, it's like a seed that starts small and then grows. It starts small in your heart and grows. And it's going to take a long time. Why would we want to hurry you? And so put that back up again. If that is us, who couldn't be safe here? If that is us, who couldn't flourish at the Paradox Church? Whatever you're walking through, whatever you're facing, whatever you're doing, if this people, this community could be a trace outline of the grace of God and to show you how God is and how God responds to you when you mess up, how safe are we? What a sweet place we would be. And so here's what I want you to do. I don't want you to take the Lord's Supper today until you take stock of your relational soul. And if there's some things in there that you find where you need to reconcile, then I want you to reconcile. And it may be weird. That may be like you going out to the lobby and making a phone call. But I don't think that we take of the bread and drink of the wine, and it's representing both our union to Christ, but also our union to one another if we're divided. We should not be allowed to be in conflict as a people, as a marriage, as a people, in any sort of relationship in the church for longer than 6 days, because you're coming to the table on the seventh day, and the call is to eat and drink. Some people are like, well, I'm not going to take communion today because I'm in conflict. No, the idea is that you would reconcile every 7 days. Like that, the idea is that you would have to forgive your brother, your sister, 7 times, even 7 times in a day.